it's a pleasure to be here today. For the record, again, my name is Will Clark. I'm with the National Conference of State Legislatures, and I'm a program principal here. And I work on issues related to legislative IT, specifically as it relates to legislative institutions. So we're really involved with state legislatures as they are modernizing, and that means a lot of things. In my greater group of looking at legislative institutions, modernization can mean things like issues related to legislative sessions, staff salary, legislative staff. But my issue really is specifically related to technology and infrastructure. So today I plan to talk about just some things that we're doing here at NCSL moving forward, but also looking at some of the main issues that are facing state legislatures right now. Particularly, I'm going to be talking about artificial intelligence, which should come as no surprise. But I'm also going to be talking about issues related to accessibility. That's something that a lot of legislatures have been moving forward with. The adoption of artificial intelligence has been a bit more mixed, but accessibility measures have been kind of across the board fairly consistent. So just a little bit about what NCSL is doing right now. So we've previously done some survey work on legislative use of artificial intelligence, a lot of outreach on just various IT issues. And we've also run several sessions at our annual event, but also at other professional development seminars related to legislative information technology and specifically AI. To that end, there's also a special working group right now that is looking at artificial intelligence in legislatures. And so it's a group of legislative staff from various states. They've been meeting quarterly, and they are looking at things like legislative policy, so drafting a model policy, and they are continuing that survey work and looking at just different applications in state legislatures. I'm also working on a training, so there will be a training that NCSL is putting on later this year in the spring, most likely with a presenter, and we'll be talking and going through specific uses of AI in state legislatures. So that kind of is our primary effort right now, but state legislatures themselves are really doing a lot of different things. I would say there are a mix of strategies. There's some low-hanging fruit out there, which people will be aware of, and then there's some more complex solutions. But a lot of people have been adopting some of the low-hanging fruit. And so one of those that has been getting more and more traction is adoption of transcription services that are using artificial intelligence. And so it's a really basic usage of AI, but it's very important for legislatures. So for capturing transcripts of committee hearings, but also floor work. And it's something that, again, seems very simple, but it can save committee staff in particular a great deal of time. And so these staff are using some tools to record and transcribe their hearings. So they're using tools like Whisper and Otter, but also whatever live stream software they're using. If they're using Teams to broadcast committee hearings, some of those tools have an AI transcription function within it. That makes it a little bit easier. But there are other offices that either record only in audio or only have like a recording of their presentations without transcripts. So some of those legislatures are converting those files and those meetings into a format that can then be fed into large language models, which can then develop a transcript. So you might take a video hearing, strip out the video, turn it into an audio file, and then feed that into Copilot to get a transcript. And once legislative staff have a transcript, then they can do a lot of things with it. They can either summarize a hearing, or they can focus on specific testimony from a person or on specific themes and elements and categories of testimony. And again, it seems very simple, but it's something that can save a ton of work, especially when legislative staff are staffing several committees. When you have requests from members, they want very specific information from a committee hearing. So that's something that a lot of legislatures are starting to adopt and look at. Beyond that, I would say the next most commonly adopted tool right now, or set of tools, are large AI platforms that are being integrated into state legislative operating systems. So thinking about Copilot and Google Gemini. And so these tools, you have varying, you have to pay for these services. So legislatures are kind of looking at what types of products to invest in for their staff and who gets what. But there are some states that are really investing in Copilot, for example. We know of several states that are experimenting with that, giving it to large portions of their staff to see what they can do with it. And so they're doing a lot of different things. If any of you are watching have worked with Copilot, it's integrated into the Microsoft network and the programs that are available. There are some uses that they specifically highlight. So things like writing emails, scheduling meetings, it can make it a little easier to find people's calendars. So there are basic efficiencies in Copilot, but people are using it for a lot of other applications as well. So one nice thing about having these systems like Copilot and Gemini within your enterprise environment is that then those programs can access archived files much more easily. So within certain sets of permissions, the legislative staff can now ask a large language model not just to look at information from the internet, but they can also look at large swaths of documents from their archives that may be challenging to find very specific information in. So just even having those prompts in an LLM to find very specific information in archived documents is very helpful. There are other things like in-document tasks and word processing. So in Word, also in spreadsheet applications, just having assistance with formulas, even just asking the Copilot within Excel just to perform a certain function for you. A lot of staff are experimenting with the limits of that. And I think a lot of these instances, what staff are finding is that the key to success with a lot of these programs is in the prompts. So being specific with prompts and then being very thorough with your prompts in terms of what you wanted to do. But there's still a lot of experimentation and these platforms are evolving and staff are still exploring a lot of the uses for these. There are other things like converting data, some sort of also taking things like tables, putting them into Excel. So some really basic tasks, but all in all, when you think about each of those different tasks, as people start to master them, they can save a lot of time. And so that's one huge area that legislatures are working with AI. Another one that is very nascent is translation services. So I don't know of any legislatures right now that have an AI system that is fully implemented, that is capable of translating real time their broadcasting in many languages or their website fully. But there are some legislatures that do have some of that capability, maybe one or two languages, and they're including for their website content on their website. But we are aware of one example. It's not a legislature, but New Jersey Unemployment Office has implemented a large language model to have a wide range of translation services available for their documents, and they've shared that code. They've got some open source code, and they've been sharing that with other governments. And so some legislatures have started to take a look at that as an option moving forward. So I think that's one area where legislatures are really interested in using AI is increasing accessibility for language. Beyond just actual artificial intelligence services and technology, another very important area for state legislatures is just the development of AI usage policies for their staff. So setting those expectations, setting what is allowable for staff has become a very important task. It's also very challenging because some legislatures are reluctant to set a policy that may change in 3 months. It's a lot of work sometimes to develop, especially a legislature-wide policy. It has to go through numerous levels of approval, and it can be a pretty daunting process, especially for people when they're very busy. But we are aware of several states that have developed very comprehensive AI policies. And in fact, some of those states that were early adopters have already started revising their policies and have a 2.0. So some states are really on the cutting edge of that. There are some states that haven't started that work. There are some states that have mixed policies, so maybe they don't have a legislature-wide policy, but individual sections within a legislature may have a policy. Another interesting component is when AI was first becoming a more known entity and legislative staff were starting to use these tools. There were some legislatures that halted use of AI, so they prohibited use of AI. Some of those have changed that policy and they have created additional guidance. So maybe there are guardrails, but there's not a complete disallowal of use of those tools. But there's some legislatures that have more recently begun to look at this issue and they have prohibited use of AI. So there's still a spectrum of legislatures that either prohibit AI have very lenient guidelines that just ask staff to exercise caution when using the tools, and then some more articulated guidance in between on various scales. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now with AI issues. In terms of accessibility, I would say this is a really huge issue with modernization with legislatures. It has been over the last few decades, but there's been some great strides that have been taken over the last few years as well. And one of those major areas people might not think about, but is very important for the function of legislatures and doing their work, are Capitol buildings themselves. So the place where legislators and legislative staff and the public all come together to create laws. So there are many recently completed building projects that have taken place in state legislatures in the last few years, and there are also many more that are currently in development and that are planned. So this is something that's a relatively common theme. There's actually been quite a bit of construction recently, and there are a number of causes for that. There are a number of things that are driving that. Accessibility is one of those things, actual ADA accessibility. But another is just a lot of that infrastructure is quite aged. And so there have been, very not basic, but remodels for kind of more basic modernization functions like modernizing electricity, water, restrooms, things like that. Many legislatures have done that. Resolve safety issues, from infrastructure that just isn't as safe as it used to be, just from wear and tear of time. But also things like increasing internet accessibility within a legislature. So not just increasing speeds for staff and for members, but also having publicly available internet for when the public is there and that they can use that as well. Another thing that legislatures have really been working on as they complete, I think, more complex upgrades have been upgrading committee rooms. So I think legislative floors, those are kind of more hallowed spaces. They do get some upgrades in tech, like their voting systems and their voting boards, and also the tech that staff use, like clerks and secretaries use to moderate proceedings and to count votes. But in committee rooms, especially, I think there have been a lot of advances over the last 5 to 10 years, and then increasingly recently with the development of AI. So in committee rooms, really the core modernization has been live streaming the hearings and also allowing for remote participation. And so in doing that, you need to have better cameras, and you need to have video screens in committee rooms. And when you need to have those things, you also need to have better mics, you need to have better control systems. So there's all these systems that are interconnected that when you upgrade one thing for a particular purpose, like allowing remote testimony, for example, you need to upgrade a lot of other things. So that's been a large project for a lot of legislatures. And one interesting component of that is the integration of artificial intelligence into those systems. So for example, in the Virginia legislature, they recently upgraded a lot of their committee rooms, and AI has been integrated into their programming so that it better tracks people who are speaking. So that's something that so you have a new camera, you have a new system with artificial intelligence in the processing application, and then that allows better transcripts of a hearing. So when different people are speaking, then it's better able to capture who is saying what when. And so that's one development that's very recent that I think is going to increase the quality of transcripts moving forward as well. And then I think the last major component, again, it's the last thing I talked about, but probably one of the most important, one of the most commonly cited with modernization of buildings is increasing ADA accessibility. So that includes physical access, but also making proceedings more available to people with various disabilities. That could be for hearing and visually impaired people. So that could be better access on screens. So having those live transcripts of proceedings in the committee rooms themselves. Also having audio technology available for members of the public, whoever else wants to attend meetings. But also this kind of gets into website design and then having accessibility of hearings on a live broadcast. So a person who is in a room can also have their own personal screen and be participating in a committee meeting that way as well. So those are some of the main ways that Capitol buildings have been modernized recently. Another really important area, this is globally, but is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, so WCAG. There's a series of accessibility guidelines that have been published by the Web Accessibility Initiative, and they're supposed to improve web accessibility for users with cognitive learning, mobility disabilities, and low vision. These are primarily focused on legislative websites, and so legislatures themselves have been doing a ton of work to try and comply with these guidelines. Those of you familiar with these guidelines, they're widely encompassing. They take a lot of work to, especially for some older websites, to modify, but they can help a lot with public access of legislative material. So things like spacing, making sure spacing is sufficient for text on websites, for readability, ensuring that navigation elements, like for contacts, help mechanisms are consistently placed across pages, and even ensuring that icons and targets are an appropriate size or have sufficient spacing on a page to make them easier to access and click. So that's one area that a lot of legislatures, especially legislative IT departments, have been spending a lot of time on right now, and that is really across legislatures. Because even though they're not necessarily required, they're required at the federal level, they're not necessarily required at the state level, but they have been required to comply with accessibility, disability laws in our country. So courts have ruled that legislatures need to comply with these requirements. They're also a good idea anyways, modernizing website, making content more available for processing for everybody. But that's something that legislative IT departments have really been spending a lot of time on. And then the last thing that I'll kind of round out my remarks on are development of more advanced constituent relationship management software. So legislators are having more and more interactions with constituents, with special interests, with other sources of information, and also with spam. So legislators are really being bombarded by communications right now and information. At the same time, they are looking to engage with their constituents in more meaningful ways. So these constituent relationship management softwares have been around for a long time. They've been developing and advancing. They can be very complex. They can be very simple. So they can be, commercial off the shelf. There are many vendors that provide very advanced solutions. They can be built in-house. And this is something that I wanted to talk about as more and more legislatures are using open source software to develop their own built in-house solutions. And then also there are many legislatures that use simple databases and spreadsheets for tracking engagement with their constituents. But regardless of what system legislators use and their staff use, they are relying on these systems more and more frequently to track and manage their communications. And so you can think of maybe 100 constituents write an email to a legislator about a particular issue. And so how do they parse out the opinions of those positions when they have over 100 bills or more, way more in any given session that they're debating, that they're thinking about how they want to vote on, and they want their constituents' ideas to be reflected in. So these systems give legislators a way to catalog the systems, but also a way to process that information. And so they can be very complex and provide a lot of information and be integrated into legislative systems. And so this is one way in particular that I think we've been getting a lot of requests about at NCSL. I think something that is going to continue to increase as legislators, as issues become more complex, as things start to modernize and they get more and more information. I think more and more legislators are going to be turning to these tools. So that concludes my spoken remarks, but I'm looking forward to engaging in some question and answer.
All right, thank you, William. Actually, you focused a lot of your talk around the subject of AI, and that's kind of where I'd like to drill in and talk a little bit. First of all, have you taken a look at how other countries are dealing with AI and the policies they're coming up with? The one I'm thinking about particular is how the EU has created guardrails relating to the use of information and understand the provenance of the information that is actually being used by the AI tools. Have you been taking a look at those approaches elsewhere in the world?
We have been, and I would say a lot of that work is being done by a separate committee that we have in NCSL, and they're really focused more on the policy environment. So I think as opposed to state legislatures that are looking at their policies and what they need to include for themselves, I think it's been more at the congressional level with input from state legislators. So there is a group that's been looking at that, and there are several states. I believe Idaho has been looking at this, California, of course. So I know some states have really been involved in these efforts to create more comprehensive guidance for regulation of AI and internal policies. But I think that issue has been more focused on the policy area, and I think regulating AI of not necessarily with legislatures, but maybe state governments, so executive branch agencies, and then private companies online. So I think that's where we've seen most of that movement. And then I would say connected to that, but not necessarily directly right now related to international policies, but is the idea, like I said, of provenance and privacy protections. So I think those two issues are starting to come together. But I think we have been, my department particularly has been more focused on, say, cybersecurity and then actual data privacy protections. But I think we haven't made that connection quite yet to legislative AI policies for usage, actually.
I spoke to a lawyer about a year ago, and he had been tasked with taking a look at documents that had been written by AI or had been written by humans to see if he could tell the difference. And what had shocked him was how much he got it wrong, how much he couldn't tell them apart. Are there any concerns there about where the information that the legislation, for instance, that is being proposed, where that legislation is coming from, and how it was formulated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the angle that I've heard the most concern about, I think, is more from the staff perspective with these issues, and I think it does translate to legislators themselves. But I think it's the idea that legislative institutions need to be a trusted source of information. So there is the element of who drafts legislation. I think that's really important. But I think the issue is slightly related to what you're talking about is when staff use artificial intelligence to draft maybe research papers or analysis of legislation or anything that goes on a legislative website. I think a lot of people are having discussion about to what extent does it make sense to allow AI to be part of that? What are the reviews and controls that need to be put in place to ensure that information is accurate and the provenance of that information? So I think there have been a lot of concerns about that because at the end of the day, a legislature does need to be, again, a guiding foundation of truth. You can debate upon different bills, but I think at the end of the day, information on those websites is very important. In terms of legislation itself, I definitely know from, as you mentioned, a drafter. I think from the drafting perspective, I would say the main issues that we've heard are really just about the legislation that's drafted by AI. To what extent does it conform with existing statutes? I think that can be an issue. So in some instances, it can be more work to go back and analyze what has been drafted than to work with a sponsor on a bill beforehand. If it's drafted using AI. So I think there's a concern about the amount of work from legislators themselves. Yet I haven't heard a lot of concerns yet about again some of the micro. I believe some of the micro interests that can be put into, that can subtly be added to legislation. But I have heard that issue at the national level. And I think it's something that is going to be dropping down into the state level conversations very soon.
Do you think that perhaps we might be giving too much power to the companies that are providing the AI tools, where they can tweak and bias the systems in their own favor? Has that come up? Has that been an issue?
Yeah, I would say where I've seen that issue come up is I think some legislatures that are looking to use these tools in many instances are looking to rely on solutions that they're able to build themselves using open source software like Llama. Having those applications in a controlled environment, I think specifically to address what you just mentioned, concerns about how companies might use information, how they might modify models, or how models again might reflect bias, how that information is processed. So I think that's definitely a concern, especially from, I think, legislative IT staff that I've talked with about just implementing these types of applications in their environments. I think another way that some legislatures have been getting some more assurances is by incorporating programs from trusted sources like Microsoft and Google, relatively trusted source. They are, they're trusted to the extent that Microsoft is on all of our computers, or most computers in legislative environments. A lot of legislatures are turning to Google. And so I know we've talked with, drafting agencies as well that are looking at artificial intelligence. In a way, all that information is already kind of accessible in those enterprise environments. So if you are able to put, some controls on the, large language models that you're using, you can have some assurances there, especially compared to, using the public version of ChatGPT and, some of those other applications out there. So, and then the last thing I would just say is that, yeah, I think one direction that a lot of legislatures are moving is away from this kind of hodgepodge of AI applications and really moving towards integrated AI solutions with some other trusted vendors. And a lot of legislatures are also looking at their contracts, I think, more closely. I think that's going to be an issue. Again, that's widely debated among legislatures. There's only so much control a legislature might have over the contract for a service, especially if it's very boilerplate. They may not be able to ask for additional privacy protections or assurances about how models are trained. But again, I think all of those are considerations right now.
One of the things that I've had some concern with in my years in this field, one of the things that's been drilled into me is to not accidentally pierce any client attorney privilege bubbles that may exist. It seems like AI systems could very easily do that inadvertently. Does this come up? Is this an issue?
Yeah, I would say so. And I think where it's come up the most is, we've had conversations with companies that have drafting software. And so that's one of our, major concerns is the privacy of that information. In the short term, I think it's more important. So longer term leaks maybe are a little less damaging, but they're still very important. Any kind of information that is in a system that is used down the road, either for training or just is part of a data leak potentially with the company. But I think in the actual application of those tools, one approach that I've seen that we've talked with drafting companies about is maybe having a tiered schedule of services that legislatures are comfortable with. So maybe you have AI within a drafting program, isolated within a drafting program that only helps you with ensuring that it conforms to statute and to code. So that's kind of a double check for drafters to make sure they've gotten all of the statutory citations correct. The next level being it can help you draft small legislation, and then all the way up to however comprehensive you want to be with its access to information. But I think one of the that approach gets at bifurcating what environments AI has access to, and so maybe that's segregated within a tool, or maybe that's particular elements of the drafting process are only accessible to an AI, and that other parts are not. But again, I think that privacy is incredibly important, and there are legal ramifications of that as well.
You mentioned early on that a number of states had initially slammed all use of AI shut and then opened up to allow some applications of it. What did they learn that allowed them to decide to open up the use of AI?
I think it was just some general learning. I think there were so many unknowns. We were getting those articles, with the AI going down some dark paths, in large language models, just conversations that people were having. So I think there were just so many unknowns. I think a lot of legislatures just wanted to put, even if they knew it wasn't permanent at the time, they just wanted to buy more time to look into these applications. I think probably part of it was just looking at existing services. Again, I think that the word artificial intelligence kind of became scary, but then I think there were a lot of conversations people had about how it's already so integrated into many of the processes that we do, and so maybe it's less being scared of AI, artificial intelligence, and being more careful about how it's applied. And I think people just learning about what large language models are, and kind of what safety protocols should be put in place in terms of trusted information. So I think one important distinction that I found that I thought was really informative was a great way to kind of look at the issue from a legislative perspective is that if you're using the tools, almost any tool really, with publicly available information, it is far less damaging, and you need to use far less discretion with the actual inputs than if you're putting any kind of private information into a tool. So I think that has, I think for some legislatures, that has taken a lot of, variability or, a lot of stress out of a situation, is if they have a policy that specifically says you can use these tools or you can use these particular tools, but you can only put publicly available information into them, and then there have to be processes afterwards to review that content. And I think, again, also making it that an analyst or a director is responsible for all content that is developed by their group. So if there's a fiscal analyst or a director of research and they've used these AI tools to develop any kind of product, at the end of the day, if there's any kind of bias or if there's any inaccuracy in that work product, that's ultimately on them. And so I think just ensuring some of those basic IT processes that legislatures have been working with on just security and user access and any other type of creation, that those also apply in many instances to AI. And so I think a lot of legislatures got more comfortable with it. A lot of members started using it. I think that helped a lot too. So I think as people started to use the tools, see what they were able to do, what they weren't able to do, I think that also increased a lot of comfort.
Changing gears a little bit. It's now 5 years since COVID hit. A lot of things changed in that time frame. What things are you doing to help legislatures modernize around the area of public participation in the process? You touched on that a little bit in terms of allowing people to participate remotely. Are there any other things that you're doing that would increase public participation in the political process?
At the end of the day, that really is up to the legislatures themselves, the decisions that they choose to make. I think one of the most important roles that we serve at NCSL is connecting people who have made some of these changes. We share policies. We're also, having these events, people are able to, talk to each other about, things that are happening in their legislatures. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there are some legislatures that want to move forward with those practices and increase that accessibility. Sometimes it's by necessity. Alaska is one of the earliest adopters of having remote participation because they had to, just based on their geography. And so there are some states that have been really forced to be early adopters, others that have chosen to do so. As you mentioned, during COVID, states were scrambling to ensure that they could continue their processes while respecting safety concerns. But after COVID, there were some states that those were temporary privileges afforded to legislators and to the public for either remote testimony or for remote voting. So there are some legislatures that have revoked those, and right now it's not necessarily a technical capability, but it's a choice to have in-person engagement for various reasons. So at the end of the day, it really is up to legislatures. Every legislature is so different. They all have different rules and histories, statutes guiding their decisions, and different visions from leadership and different needs and requirements. So I think again, I think the best thing that we can do for legislatures is to give unbiased, accurate information, connect them with people that are doing activities when they're interested in it, when it makes sense from an economic perspective, within resource constraints, or when it makes sense, maybe within a policy window, they're already conducting some upgrades or reviewing some policies. Then we can connect those individuals. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's up to the legislatures to determine their practices.
Okay, well, thank you. Those are my questions.